Pacific region, like others around the world, has been pushing harder to transition to renewable energy. One key and growing component is wind energy, especially offshore. APEC now has blown past other parts of the world to become a leader in terms of installations and generation. But some challenges remain. CNA's Julie Yu looks at the state of play.
An English writer once wrote a poem called "Who Has Seen the Wind?" And yes, you can't see it, but you can see the race to harness its inexhaustible power. Wind farms popping up onshore and, more crucially, offshore, energizing millions of households from Europe to here in Asia, now a global leader, with China a major driver.
It's very clear that offshore wind in APEC is going to be the largest market by far going forward. And not just that, in our projection, we actually see the cost of offshore wind in China almost competing at the level of coal power by the end of this decade. And that's incredible. Japan, Korea, Taiwan, they're looking to kind of slow down nuclear, slow down coal, and replace that with offshore wind. So they're going to ramp up too.
Danish multinational power company Ørsted is among the firms tapping into the Asia Pacific, with a focus on one of the fastest growing markets, Taiwan.
We believe Asia Pacific is very important in terms of the green transition. Ørsted has a vision to create a world that runs entirely on green energy. And if you want to do that, Asia Pacific is obviously very, very important. It's an area where a lot of energy is consumed. It's also an area where we're seeing the effects of the greenhouse gas emissions. The conditions for setting up offshore wind farms are very good. Wind speeds are very good. Taiwan will definitely be able to be one of the front runners in the transition into renewables.
Well, wind is the largest and fastest growing source of renewable power globally. It generated nearly 8% of all energy last year. Combined with solar, it tallies to 12%. Compare that, though, to fossil fuels at 80%. But even with wind power generation seeing double-digit annual growth, it's not enough. The Global Wind Energy Council says yearly wind energy installations must scale up by 4 times in this decade to help keep the worldwide average temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Energy think tank Ember says that wind power must account for more than 20% of global electricity by 2030 if net zero emissions goals are to be achieved. And so growth is the answer for the wind industry. Bigger turbines, bigger blades, bigger farms, all to maximize the green energy return on global investments that cost tens of billions of dollars. The world's highest wind turbine in Denmark is more than half the height of some of the tallest buildings in Asia. But China now boasts the largest offshore one at more than 250 meters. Its 120-meter-long blades can sweep an area equivalent to around 7 standard football pitches. A larger rotor diameter means more power can be generated. But while bigger is better, it also presents another problem.
These giant wind farms are more complicated to install and maintain. They require very specialized and very expensive ships, according to Singapore-based fund Seraya Partners. Last year, it launched Sine Renewables, a company that owns, operates, and leases vessels for offshore wind farms.
So essentially what we do is that we enable wind farms to be built across Asia, and we provide the vessels, specialized vessels, anything that's small vessels, 10 million to 500 million, to help build and maintain wind farms across Asia.
Sine Renewables is trying to solve a major problem: demand for these ships far and away outstripping supply.
There's only 5 or 6 major shipyards in Asia, maybe one in Europe. They're still churning out, new vessels. And generally, it takes about 3 years to build new vessels. So the number of new vessels that can be built globally, you can count that very quickly. But the demand has increased by tenfold. So there's a natural mathematical supply-demand gap that cannot be overcome structurally, at least for the next 10 years.
So you need these very advanced vessels that can install skyscrapers out in the open ocean. But right now, there are rules in every country that kind of prohibits foreign vessels to operate within their territory. You have that gap where there's not enough specialized vessels, and you have that gap in policy where the government does not allow so many foreign vessels to come in. So that's where the bottleneck is happening.
But all the complications aren't stopping the wind energy race in Asia. Sure, they're making it more challenging, but for companies such as Ørsted, nothing seems insurmountable. It's also focused on the next frontier, floating wind turbines.
Longer term, the world is going to have to transition into also having floating offshore wind as part of it. The oceans are vast and wind speeds are very good at the oceans, but you don't have the shallow seas everywhere to put up fixed bottom offshore wind turbines. So we believe that in a span of not too many years, we will start to really see the build out of also floating offshore wind. It is a technology that is not yet fully matured, obviously. There are only a few demo projects in place right now, but Ørsted will also be one of the front runners when it comes to floating offshore wind, and we have a number of projects that we are proceeding with now.
And so it turns out, while none of us can see the wind, more and more people globally are seeing its benefits. The hope is the willpower, the money, and the technology can be harnessed in time to make a difference as the need to lock in the global energy transition becomes more urgent. Julie Yu, CNA, Singapore.